Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Outer Limits, the 1990s version. In this video, I will just give my overall, non-spoiler thoughts on the entire show of The Outer Limits. Now, if you are unaware, I have recently covered every season of The Outer Limits, every episode, I should say, of The Outer Limits, one season at a time. Each video where I cover each season, I go into every single episode of each season, so the video for each season turns out to be like 2 hours long. And so I go into a long, in-depth thought of like every single episode and what I thought of the season as a whole and that sort of thing. So usually when I end each of these, the series where I cover an entire TV show one season at a time and do every single episode, usually I do a couple of videos to sort of celebrate the ending of covering that. Usually a top 10 and a top best and the top worst episodes, which I will be doing. And sometimes I do another random episode. And it's funny because usually I do even longer episodes, like an hour and a half, 2 hours, where I rant about, whatever I want to. However, this time around, I actually wanted to do a shorter, more succinct, as I said, non-spoiler, just overview of The Outer Limits, and maybe for those who haven't seen the show before, haven't seen all of the show, or are curious about it or whatnot. And that is to say, like, The Outer Limits, if you're not aware, is an anthology series. As the 90s version, of course, was a revival from a classic 1960s show, which I haven't really seen. I've only seen 1 or 2 episodes of it, but I didn't like it, and I was really off-put by it, and I have no interest in ever watching it. I'm sorry, I just don't get into the sort of more classical things. Like, every once in a while I'll delve into the older sci-fi, like the original Star Trek, and even the Twilight Zone. But for some reasons, The Outer Limits always looked cheap and cheesy to me, and I just couldn't get into it. However, I grew up with this later version of The Outer Limits, the 90s version, and it was always something that I loved wherever, because I didn't have Showtime, so I never had access to it. So it was kind of a white whale, so when I could see it, I always went out of my way, and I usually was blown away by it. Usually, not always. So I always thought very fondly of this show, and so like a decade ago when I did a video or a list, it wasn't a decade actually, I did a list on IMDb like a decade ago, but more recently, like 5 or 6 years ago, I did a video on my channel where I did like my favorite science fiction shows of all time, and I put the show The Outer Limits on it, and I put it quite high, and it made me, I realized after doing that I had never seen all of it, and I'd only seen some of it. And in fact, when I went back and watched all of it, which I just did recently for these series of videos, this is the first time I've seen the whole show, that I had only seen like less than 25% of the show before. Maybe it would probably be fair to say like 10 or 15% is all I've seen, and I was calling it one of my favorite science fiction shows of all time just based on that tiny little margin of what I've seen. And I was actually blown away on my rewatch of how much I hadn't seen. Like, there was a whole bigger picture that I was missing. For some reason, for reruns and DVDs, they were only showing like a few select episodes over and over again. And so I've seen what I saw multiple times, but there was so much of it I hadn't seen, and a lot of it was actually great. I don't know why they were hiding these great episodes, and some of it not so good. And see, that's the thing. So after watching it, would I still consider it one of my favorite science fiction shows of all time? And the answer is yes. I think it would definitely still be in my top 20. I don't know about top 10. That's hard. I'd have to, look at it. But definitely top 20. And I would call it the second best sci-fi anthology show, or sci-fi fantasy, if you want to go that route, anthology show of all time. The first one being Black Mirror, and the third one being the original Twilight Zone. So I actually think that I like this better than the original Twilight Zone. Of course, that's just my personal taste. As I said, I'm not that big into more classic older shows. So that might have something to do. Like, the original Twilight Zone has way too many episodes with old people in it. I'm saying that are just boring. So I don't know if I could actually sit down and watch that from start to finish the way I did with this. And so I do think it is a really effective, very creative sci-fi anthology show. I love how it explores all different aspects of sci-fi. One thing I remember being completely blown away is going on, turning the TV, and seeing an episode about random people on a spaceship, like in space. I mean, to me, that's kind of rare unless you have established shows like Star Trek or Firefly or Farscape or whatnot. But it was odd to just see some random, like standalone episode that's just random people working in space. It's like really an anthology show like this, and I think this one more than any other is really like a collection of short stories. Black Mirror is more like a collection of short films, which is there's definitely a difference. Where even though this is the visual medium of television, it still feels like written fiction, more like a collection of short stories. And sure enough, a lot of the episodes are in fact based off of short stories, which is a really fun, great outlet for them to explore. Now, so The Outer Limits explores all sense of sci-fi, and producers, people involved with the show himself, said the difference between The Outer Limits and the Twilight Zone is fantasy sci-fi, where The Outer Limits is strictly science fiction. So everything has to work through that science fiction lens, whereas the Twilight Zone could do stuff like there's 5 people who are like a ballerina and a western guy, cowboy, and they don't know why they're in there, turn out to be toys. There's nothing science fiction about that, so that wouldn't be in The Outer Limits. So going back and rewatching the show, it is a 90's television show that has like 24 episodes per season, which is different than modern times, because modern times you have fewer episodes. They're allowed to have bigger budgets, and so each episode is more grand, and they take more time to write each episode. And so inevitably, with that format of the 90s, 80s, sci-fi shows where you got 24, 25 episodes a season, you're going to have a lot of duds. And that does vary from season to season. There are more duds in some seasons and less than others. But not every episode is perfect. But I sort of take that with a grain of salt, because when the show hits, it really hits, and it really does it right. Now, there are a lot of reoccurring themes in The Outer Limits. One thing I mentioned in one of my videos previous is a very common theme is a lot of episodes, a couple each season, I would say, follow the same format of there's a scientist in modern times who makes a discovery, but the people they're working for some reason or another, want to shut the project down. They get upset, so they go rogue and they do the project anyway. Whether it's on the test subject is themselves, which is usually the case, or sometimes another person, and then something goes wrong, and they have to deal with the consequences of that. That I just described maybe 20 episodes of The Outer Limits, probably. I don't know, I haven't looked at the exact number, but it's a lot. So it is. They did fall back to that exact format too often, in my opinion, and those weren't my favorite episodes. As I said, my favorite are actually the ones that are set in space, but not all of them are golden. There were a few duds, as well. And there's some other great episodes that I love that has nothing to do with space, but a lot of them do have to do with time travel, which is something I think they usually got right. So I did prefer the more science fiction-y out there episodes as opposed to the ones set in modern times, which just involved like a robot or a weird science experiment or an alien coming to visit in modern times. So those weren't my things as much, but as I said, there was a lot of great. And there were a couple seasons when I start watching and I'd be like, "Oh my god!" Like it would be episode after episode that's kind of bland or not that great. But by the end of the season, there'd be so many great episodes to offset that it wouldn't bother me. And again, it's that whole sort of 90's aspect of having different things. Now, I say Black Mirror is better. However, even Black Mirror had its duds. Like Black Mirror only had 3 episodes per season, or some like 6 episodes in some seasons. So 6 was considered a long season, whereas The Outer Limit has like 20 to 25 episodes per season. Although I think season 2 only has 18. Maybe that was a year of a writer's strike or something. I don't know. But regardless, they have a hell of a lot more episodes. But even Black Mirror has some duds. Like every season will have at least 1 or 2 episodes I think are quite terrible. But the rest of the episodes are great, amazing. So if you although Black Mirror has a very, very different, distinct feel to it, that's more unique, which is probably why I would elevate it slightly in my mind. However, because a lot of The Outer Limits is kind of typical of sci-fi, particularly of the 90's. And I also found the other thing that's interesting to note about The Outer Limits, another show I would compare it to that I think it most resembles, other than Stargate SG-1, which I'll get to shortly, is the X-Files. And it does seem to me that they were trying to emulate the X-Files, not all the time, but sometimes, because they're similar in some ways. Most of the episodes of The Outer Limits are trying to be dark and twisty, and some of them are kind of horror-esque, like the X-Files was. The thing that struck me most similar is the way that the X-Files opened with their opening credits, where it would have a teaser and like some scary shit would happen, the aliens would pop up, whatever, and it would go to dun 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 dun, dun, like it would hard cut to that. And Outer Limits did a very similar thing, where it had like really creepy shit happening in the teaser, and then it would cut to to the opening credits. Which I gotta talk about that for a second. I'm gonna one day do a video with my favorite opening credits of any TV show of all time, and this Outer Limits one is gonna be high because the opening credits are amazing. It's the one thing that really drew me into the show immediately, and it's something that I absolutely loved. And it's a takeoff of the 60's version. I've heard like some people reference it in pop culture, and one person, I can't remember who it was, they're saying, "Oh yeah, The Simpsons made some off reference to some 60's theme show that nobody would have heard of or watched." I'm like, excuse me, pardon me, sir, but no, it was redone in the 90's and it was redone better. I think this is actually the theme, of course, was taken from the 60's version, but I've seen the 60's version of the theme, and of course it's what you would expect. It's cheesy. There's nothing wrong with your television. This is the Outer Limits. It's that kind of cheesiness where they really modernized it and updated it and made it incredibly creepy. I'm just in awe of the how creepy and just really great, and they really set the tone with this opening credits of The Outer Limits, and they played, they used the 60s version as a baseline, but they really upped it. And they made it a fuck ton more creepy. Like that 60's one's not really creepy. I remember I had a friend when I was a teenager who watched the pilot episode of The Outer Limits, The Sand Kings, while he was on LSD, And he said that opening credits like really freaked him out, and he was like, "No, you're not controlling everything I'm seeing here." I always remember that. And so that's kind of why I mock the opening credits on each of one of my reviews to begin with, is more of an admiration of just how great they are and how sick. And a lot of times I think that really does those intro does set the tone for the creepiness of the Outer Limits. And they also had the guy who does the voice, who apparently is the same actor who played Kahless on Star Trek Next Generation. Not Kalish, that's a modern bullshit. But he played Kahless on, what's that episode called? Rightful Heir, Next Generation. Anyway, that's the actor who does the intro voice, and they have him do like an intro and outro of every episode, which I think there's a varying degree of success, particularly the bad episodes. And sometimes like the shit he says it's kind of like he's too on the nose. It's like, yes, I get that's what the episode's about. You don't need to have this creepy voice tell me what the episode's about. But other times it does actually work and sort of to reinforce like the message and the creepiness of the episodes. But in other times it's nonsense, and I was like, what does that even have to do with anything? So that works. Yeah, it's off and on as to whether or not the intro thing works. Now, one of the main important things I got to talk about the Outer Limits is the does have, and this is a staple of the show, and this is probably something they carried over from the 60s version, and this is something you kind of associate with the Twilight Zone as well, is that it has a tendency to have twist, shock, ironic endings, and usually in a dark tone. Like something happens, like Twilight Zone's kind of infamous for this, like it's a cookbook and stuff like that, and so the Outer Limits tends to do that a lot, and sometimes that can be a bit predictable or a bit cliche. Like there's a couple of them, like I could tell, I knew it was going to lead to a dark twist ending, and so I could predict exactly what it was going to be. Dun dun dun! But, other times it absolutely works and blows me away and has the desired effect of just leaving me in awe of me. Holy fuck, that is dark. And other times it's just cheesy. It comes off as too cliche or too sort of staple and predictable, and you're just like, oh yeah, you got it, you just have to throw in your dark ending. But the good thing about the show is that they don't do that for every episode. I mean, just like the Twilight Zone, there's some episodes that do have a happy ending, or some that maybe the ending's not happy, but it's normal. It's not like a twist, shock, dun 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 type ending. And sometimes the shock is more upbeat and not as like ironic and dark. Another common theme I found in the Outer Limits, and it does have some social commentary and political messages thrown in there, and they are, of course, left-leaning, which I've talked about in my reviews, and I think that irritated some people, but I'm sorry, if I'm talking about a show that has left-leaning social commentary, I'm going to talk about it and actually praise it for that, to be frank. One of the common social commentary that I found the Outer Limits have made several times, in fact some of my favorite episodes, is the warning about the dangers of colonialism, and that they deal with this in the space sci-fi stories where humans have the darker elements, or shall we say the more primal, greedy elements of humanity has sort of dominated, and they have either conquered aliens or wiped them out, and in the name of profit or colonialism, and it comes back and bites them on the ass. So that is a theme that they made several times that I actually loved when they do, because I think they do it so successfully, and it is a powerful message. And there was a couple other ones. There was ones warning about the dangers of gun violence. There was one warning about people who deny climate change exists, and the whole propaganda around that. Another one of my favorite episodes, and a few other sort of social commentary type, which I actually think the Outer Limits does very well. Oh, and of course, addressing issues like sexual assault, um, and which is and the Holocaust, and two of the best episodes of the entire show, which are very sort of risky topics to tackle, and they ended up creating two of the best hours of television uh, tackling those topics. So, yeah. In case you haven't wondered, I definitely would recommend The Outer Limits. Now, I mentioned Stargate SG-1. If those who have seen SG-1, I think it was made by the same studio. I think there's a couple producers who are similar. There's some aesthetic touches, I would say. Like, there's a lot of episodes that they definitely got the same composer to do. That they had to do SG-1. The music's similar. The way it's filmed in Vancouver, just like SG-1. So you see a lot of recurring actors. But more than that, like particularly, I found season 2 and 3 was very similar in tone, in the aesthetics, the set design, the music, the way it's presented, and the way that they use clip shows, which, you know, SG-1 and Outer Limits both were shows that would have clip shows, but they would try to craft an interesting, unique story around it. Now, I praised SG-1 for doing that because I thought that for the most part they were successful. And I used to praise the Outer Limits for that as well because I saw a few of them that worked. But then watching it again, I didn't realize just how many clip shows they have. And unfortunately, they find the need, which I don't understand. I think it was probably pressured by the studio, but they had the need to end every single season finale of the Outer Limits, with the exception of one, season 2, ends in a clip show. In fact, the final season 7, has 2 clip shows that end out the season, and I don't understand that. And I think more often than not, they do not work. There's one I think of that I actually kind of liked, but the rest of them there's 2 that I kind of like. Sorry, and there's one episode that I liked, but I think the clips were unnecessary. I think the episode would have been better if they just got rid of the clips. But the rest of them, and there's like 4 or 5 others, are terrible. They're absolutely terrible, and it's they try to cram like these clips into this story, and they do a terrible job at it. And it's funny because they thought they were getting canceled in season 6 when Showtime canceled them, but then Sci-Fi picked them up for one more season. But they made a 2-part finale, which I just heard the producers describe as this epic finale that wraps up the show. But I thought it was terrible because they made it a clip show, and it was obvious that they were recrafting the clips, or sometimes the clips were just completely unnecessary in order to fit this narrative, and I think they would have been better off leaving out the clips. So that definitely is a downside of the Outer Limits. But as I said, it's a show that has nearly like 25 episodes per season, so you can have some thoughts. Anyway, I said this would be a short video, and we're almost approaching 25 minutes, but it's short comparatively to my other videos, which are 2 hours long. But I do think I'm going to wrap things up here, and as I mentioned, of course, The Outer Limits is a hard recommend. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't seen very much of it, I would recommend to seek it out. It is hard to find. It's funny because when I was first going to do my rewatch of The Outer Limits, it was on Hulu. So I purposely bought Hulu, which I didn't have before, so I could watch The Outer Limits, and then it was gone. By the time I got Hulu, it was not on Hulu anymore. It was on Amazon. So it's like, okay, I'll watch it on Amazon. And then when I went to watch it, it was gone from Amazon too. So then it was on the Roku channel, which I had to endure ads. So I was watching it on the Roku channel, and I got all the way up to season 5, and halfway through season 5, I went to watch it on the Roku channel, and it just disappeared without any warning. God damn it, that pissed me off. So it wasn't anywhere. So I had to buy the last 3 seasons on DVD, 5, 6, and 7, which irritated me because this is the middle of season 5. I had to buy it from Amazon and wait like 3 weeks for it to get here. So I had to. So that's why it took me longer to do my season 5 review. But yeah, so I had to watch the final 3 seasons. So it is difficult to find. You might have to get on DVD or wait till streaming services. I believe if you have cable, I think it's on the channel. God, I can't even remember. Comet. Yeah, the Sci-Fi Channel. But they were only showing it 1 episode per week. Like, they didn't have it on demand. They only had season 1 on demand, and you had to pay for it. So, so that wasn't an option because I wasn't going to wait week to week. But, and, you know, those, if those are willing to check it out or who want to check it out, you could delve into it that way. Just do it because it doesn't matter when you jump into it because it's an anthology show, so it doesn't matter what season you start watching it. But per chance, if you want to watch it in exact order like I did, then you may have to buy the DVDs or wait for another streaming service to pick it up. Who knows? But anyway, I would recommend watching it. And now, of course, I'm talking about America, of course. You know, those who live in other countries will have different situations, which I don't know what's going on. Because I first wanted to watch this when I lived in New Zealand, but I had no access to it. It wasn't on DVD. DVDs were prohibitively expensive for me at the time because they were like $150 per DVD collection for a season. So, there was a streaming service over there that had only the last 2 seasons, so I couldn't watch the whole thing. But anyway, so point is, it might be different for other people who live in other countries, but that was the situation, at least currently, as I'm making this in the year 2021. That was the situation here in the U.S. But anyway, my rating for The Outer Limits, 1990s version, out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. Close to a 10, but as I said, it's not perfect. They do fall back in the same cliches over and over again, but I would say this is one of the best science fiction shows of all time, in my opinion. And as I said, highly recommend. If you want to watch my top 50 best episodes, and it will give you an idea of which episodes you should focus on and which ones you should skip if you don't want to sit through all the bad episodes. But then again, that's just my opinion. Your opinion may differ, so maybe it's worth watching the whole season, see how you like it. Anyway, that is it for my overall review of The Outer Limits. Thanks so much for watching, and as I said, I shall be back later this week for my top 40 best episodes of The Outer Limits and top 20 worst episodes of The Outer Limits, as well as I already done individual season reviews for all 7 seasons, which you can check out on my channel. You can also check out my channel for many more videos on other shows like Star Trek The Expanse, Better Call Saul, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.